After my sister ruined my reputation, her boss asked me for one private meeting alone. She had told everyone I was unstable, jealous, and bitter. I expected another confrontation. Instead, her boss closed the office door and put a printed email on the desk between us. I'm going to tell this in order, because the order turns out to be the entire point. Out of order, it sounds like a man explaining himself, and I've done enough of that to know it never works. I'm 37. I work in operations and financial compliance, which means I read the documents nobody else wants to read, and I find the sentence that will cost somebody money in 18 months, 14 years, 3 companies. I'm good at it in the way that stays invisible right up until something goes wrong, and then it's briefly obvious, and then it goes invisible again. My sister is 34. She works in business development for a mid-size industrial manufacturer about 40 minutes from my house. She is genuinely excellent at the part of a job that happens in a room with other people, which is the part everyone can see, which is therefore the part everyone counts. Her boss's email arrived on a Tuesday in October. 4 sentences. He introduced himself, said he understood the request was unusual, asked whether I'd come to his office for 20 minutes, and said it was not something he wanted to put in writing. I read it about 9 times. My wife read it once and said, "You have to go. He's going to tell me to keep my distance from his company. Then he'll say it in 20 minutes and you'll drive home." She's more practical than I am. She's also the only person in my life who never once asked me for my side of it, because she'd been standing next to me the whole time and knew there weren't 2 sides. There was a story and there was me. Here's the story as it existed in the world by that October. My sister's brother had some kind of breakdown a couple of years back. Nobody says what kind. He has a thing about her success. He's been jealous since they were kids and it finally curdled. He interfered with her work. He's not well. Be careful what you say in front of him. I have never had a breakdown. I have never been treated for anything. I have never missed a day of work I didn't take on purpose. But you cannot disprove a rumor to people who already believe it, and every attempt only adds detail to the legend. A man who calmly says he isn't unstable sounds rehearsed. A man who gets upset about being called unstable has proven the point. There is no third option. I looked for one for a long time, so I stopped looking and I got very quiet. The quiet was not strategy. I just ran out of things to say to people who weren't listening. To understand any of it, you have to understand how our parents kept score. They weren't cruel. That's the part that makes it hard to describe without sounding petty. Nobody hit anybody. Nobody went without. We had a decent house, 2 working parents, a dog, birthdays. If you'd come to dinner in 1998, you'd have said we were fine, and you'd have been mostly right. But there was a rule in the house that nobody said out loud. My sister's achievements were evidence of who she was, and mine were just what was expected. If she brought home a B, my mother said the teacher was hard on her. If I brought home an A, my father nodded and said, "Good, that's the job." When she made varsity, we drove 90 minutes to watch. When I placed second in a regional math competition, my father asked who came first. At her college graduation, my mother cried so hard a stranger handed her a tissue. At mine, they were proud the way you're proud of a completed errand. My father shook my hand in the lot and said, "Well, that's done. I want to be fair to them. They loved us both, and they were not calculating. My sister needed them loudly and often, and I did not. And over 20 years, that hardened into a belief that she was the interesting one and I was the reliable one, and that reliable people don't require anything. By the time I was 25, the roles had hardened into something like physics. She was the family's ongoing narrative. Her job, her relationships, her apartment, her promotions, her problems. I was the appendix. My mother would call me to talk about my sister. My father would call me to ask if I'd talked to my mother about my sister. When I bought my house, I mentioned it at a family dinner. My mother said that was nice, and then asked whether anyone had heard how my sister's interview went. I'd made my peace with it long before any of this. That peace matters, because when the accusations started, I had already spent 2 decades learning that arguing for myself and that family was a losing move. I was extremely well prepared to stay quiet while somebody dismantled me, and I think on some level she knew that. There's one more thing about our parents that matters. They believed her by default, not because they'd examined the evidence and found her credible, because believing her was the shape the house had always been. 20 years of a family sorting itself into a person who gets the benefit of the doubt and a person who supplies it. You don't need a conspiracy when you have a habit. We went in different directions after college, and for about 10 years that worked fine. She got into business development at a distributor, then moved to the manufacturer where she still works. She's a senior account manager now, or she was. She's the person a company sends into a room to make a customer feel like the deal is already friendly. I've watched her do it at family things, turn a stranger into someone who's laughing within 90 seconds. It isn't fake. That's the thing people get wrong about her. She's genuinely warm. She just also uses it. I went the other way. Operations, then internal controls, then compliance. My whole professional life is the sentence in paragraph 4 of an appendix. I've killed deals my own companies wanted, which does not make you popular, and I've been right often enough that people stopped arguing and started sending things to me early. I'm not wealthy, I'm comfortable. Modest house, no debt but the mortgage, savings built the boring way, a 9-year-old sedan that runs. My wife and I take one real trip a year and plan it for months, which is honestly the best part. At family gatherings, the ledger read like this. My sister had just landed something big. My sister's director had said she was leadership material. My sister was being considered for something. My sister was probably going to run the place place someday. And me? I was doing well, wasn't I? Still at the same company, still in that house. Both of those were compliments in my parents' language. Both of them meant nothing had happened to me lately. For a long stretch, my sister and I got along. Not close, but fine. Holidays, a text on birthdays. She'd occasionally call when a work thing confused her, and I'd walk her through it, and she'd say I was the smartest person she knew, and I'd say it was just practice. I liked those calls more than I should have. They were the only room in my life where the family ledger flipped. I've thought about those calls a lot since, whether they meant anything to her or whether they were maintenance. I've decided I don't need to know, which is a thing you say when you've decided to stop bleeding about it. Two things happened in the same 12 months, and for a long time I thought only one of them mattered. The first one I told nobody about because it went nowhere. The second one nearly ended my family. The first one was a phone call from a recruiter in the spring 2 years ago. I wasn't looking. I want that on the record because of what got said about me later. I had a job I liked well enough and no reason to move. She found me through a professional association directory, which is a thing that happens maybe twice a year in my field and usually turns out to be nothing. She was running a confidential search for a director of commercial operations, regional manufacturer, mid-size, originally family-held, professionalizing fast, new role. They'd grown past the point where 3 people could hold the business in their heads. They'd taken a bad hit on a contract the year before, and the board wanted somebody whose whole job was making the paperwork and the reality match. That is, word for word, what I do. I've never had a job description read like it was written from my resume. I asked which company. She couldn't disclose the client until the final stage. Confidential search. The role hadn't been announced internally, and the client didn't want it circulating. Industry, revenue band, region, reporting line, that was all I got. That's normal. I've been on the hiring side of one. You don't name the client to a candidate who might mention it to somebody who mentions it to a customer. I didn't push. First interview was a phone screen with her. 50 minutes. Easy. Second was a video panel 3 weeks later with 2 executives from the client. They didn't say the company name, and the video background was a blank wall. One of them was clearly the finance side, the other was clearly operations, and about 20 minutes in, the finance one asked me a question about performance guarantees and distribution agreements, specifically how I'd handle a clause that made the manufacturer liable for downstream losses they didn't cause. I gave a long answer. It was the kind of question you can only ask if you've been burned, and I said so, and he laughed and said, "That obvious?" The call went 90 minutes. It was scheduled for 60. I got off that call and sat in my car in my own driveway for 10 minutes. I let myself think about it, which I don't usually do. Different title, real budget, a job where the thing I'm good at is the whole point instead of an obstacle. I priced the commute. I did the math on the pay band the recruiter had given me. I told my wife that night, and I said the sentence out loud that I almost never say, which was, "I think I actually want this one." She said, "Then want it." Then nothing happened. I followed up after 10 days. The recruiter said the client was still working through the slate. I followed up again after 3 weeks. She said she'd chase it. The 4th week I sent a short, polite note and got a 2-line reply that said the search had moved in another direction and she'd keep me in mind. That's the whole thing. The most ordinary disappointment in professional life. You interview, you like it, you don't get it, you never learn why, you go back to your desk. I decided I'd come across too quiet on the panel. I'm not a big personality on video. A company hiring its first director-level operations person probably wanted somebody who could stand up in front of a sales floor, and that wasn't me, and that seemed fair. I believed that for 11 months. I never told my parents I'd interviewed. I never told my sister. There was no reason to. In my family, you don't announce the thing you might not get. The second thing happened that fall. My sister called me on a weeknight, which she never did. We texted on birthdays. She called maybe 3 times a year, always about something. "I need a favor," she said. "Okay, can you look at a contract?" I hesitated long enough that she heard it. "Is it for work?" "Yes." "Then I probably shouldn't." She laughed, that warm, quick laugh that makes you feel like you're being difficult. "I'm not asking you to sign it. I'm asking if anything looks weird. You do this all day. Your company has lawyers. Our lawyers say everything is fine because the deal is good and everyone upstairs wants the deal. I want somebody who doesn't care whether we get it." That, I have to admit, was a good answer. It's the exact reason my job exists. She emailed it to me from her work address 20 minutes later. 11 words in the body. "Can you take a quick look? Would really appreciate your opinion." The agreement was attached. 41 pages. A distribution deal with a national buyer. The kind of contract that makes a sales team very excited and a compliance person very tired. I spent about 90 minutes on it. Most of it was fine. 2 clauses weren't. The one that mattered was a performance guarantee that tied her company's liability to delivery outcomes it didn't control. If the distributor's own logistics failed downstream, her company still ate the shortfall. On paper, it looked like a standard service level provision. Underneath, it was a blank check with somebody else's hand on the pen. I called her. "Section 14, I said. "You need somebody to look at Section 14 specifically. Legal already reviewed it. Then ask legal about Section 14 specifically. Ask them who's liable if the buyer's carrier misses a window." There was a pause. "You think it's that bad?" "I think it's the clause that ends up in a lawsuit in about 2 years. I'm not your attorney. I'm telling you what I'd flag if this crossed my desk." "Okay," she said. Then after a second, "Thanks. Really. Anytime." I remember feeling good after that call. That's embarrassing to write now. I felt useful to my sister. I remember thinking maybe this was the beginning of something different between us. Some adult version where the ledger didn't apply. 2 weeks later, she called again, and her voice was completely different. Did you tell anyone about that contract? No. Are you sure? Yes. Why? Somebody here is asking questions about it. About what? About Section 14? About how it got reviewed. I laughed because it didn't compute. Nobody at your company knows I exist. Right, she said. Okay, forget it. She hung up faster than she needed to. I sat with the phone in my hand for a second, and then I put it down and made dinner, because I had absolutely no framework for what I'd just heard. That was the last normal conversation I had with my sister. A month after that, my mother called me at 9 in the morning on a Saturday. What did you do? Good morning to you too. Don't. What did you do to your sister? I said nothing had happened. She said, don't pretend. I said I genuinely didn't know what she was talking about, and she told me. According to what my sister had told our parents, I had inserted myself into a major deal at her company. I had somehow obtained a confidential agreement. I had contacted one of her clients, contacted them directly, and suggested she wasn't competent to handle the account. Because of me, the deal was in trouble, and because of me, her position was in trouble. I sat down on the stairs. I've never spoken to anyone at her company, ever. I don't know her clients. I don't know their names. She says you did. Then ask her for proof. There was a pause, and then my mother said the sentence I've turned over more than any other in this whole story. Why would she lie about something like that? Not, she showed me an email. Not, here's what I saw. Just, why would she lie? As if lying required a motive from me and none at all from her. I said, ask her how I got the contract. She said she wasn't going to interrogate her daughter. I said that was interesting because she seemed comfortable interrogating her son. It did not go well. My father called 4 days later. He doesn't do long calls. You need to stay away from her work. I've never been near her work. She's building a career. So am I. This isn't a competition. I know. I've never once treated it like one. Then act like it. I wanted to ask why that instruction only ever traveled one direction. Instead, I said fine, because that's what I do. And then I sat in the garage for a while. I thought distance would end it. Distance had always worked before. Stay out of the way, wait for the weather to change, let the family get bored. It didn't work because it had never been about the contract. Over the next few months, the story grew, and it grew in a specific direction, which I noticed at the time and misread completely. It stopped being about what I'd supposedly done and started being about what I supposedly was. I heard it first from a cousin at a wedding, who put a hand on my shoulder and asked how I was doing. Really doing. I said fine, and she gave me a look of such enormous patience that I understood she'd been briefed. Then an old family friend told my wife she admired how strong she was being. Then my mother asked carefully whether I had someone I talked to. The vocabulary had changed. Not he interfered. He's not well. He's had a hard couple of years. There's a jealousy thing there. Always has been. Don't bring up work around him. I want to be precise about how effective this is because I'd never seen it done before. An accusation invites a defense. A diagnosis doesn't. Once you are described as unwell, every single thing you do afterward becomes symptom. Calm is denial. Angry is proof. Detailed is obsessive. Brief is evasive. Bringing evidence is fixation. Not bringing evidence is the absence of evidence. I had spent my career learning to build a documented, unemotional case, and I discovered that in the only situation where it ever mattered to me personally, the format itself was disqualifying. So I stopped. I told my wife I was done trying, and she said, good, which surprised me. She said, you're not going to win a fight where the other side gets to decide what your words mean. The dinner was in February for my father's birthday. I almost didn't go. My wife said we should once and see. She said it in the tone of somebody proposing an experiment with a result she already suspected. My sister arrived 40 minutes late and sat at the far end. She hugged our mother, complimented the tablecloth, and didn't look at me once for the first hour. I know because I counted, which tells you what kind of evening it was. Halfway through, my father put his fork down. There's something we need to clear up, he said, and the room went still in a way that told me it had been discussed in advance. There'd been a phone call, maybe several, a plan. My sister said, I want you to stop interfering with my career. I put my glass down. What exactly did I interfere with? You know what you did. I honestly don't. You contacted people at my company. Name one. She looked at our mother instead of at me. This is what he does. Name one person, I said. First name, job title, anything. I'm not doing this. My father said, that's enough. My mother said, can we not tonight? And I sat there, and I felt something come loose. Not anger. It was more like the floor of a room I'd been standing in for 37 years finally being visible, because I realized nobody at that table wanted an answer. An answer would have created an obligation. If I proved I hadn't done it, then somebody at that table had lied, and then they'd have to do something about that, and nobody wanted to do anything about that. It was so much cheaper for me to be the problem. Just apologize, my father said. For what? For whatever happened. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Not because it was funny, because it was so clean. That was the whole family in 4 words. For whatever happened. It didn't matter what. It only mattered that the noise stop and that it stop on the correct side of the table. Okay, I said. Everyone relaxed slightly. I'm sorry you feel like I interfered with your career. My sister's face changed. That's not an apology. It's the only honest one I have. I stood up. My wife stood up about a half second later, which I will love her for until I die. You're leaving? My father said. Yes. My mother said my name, disappointed, in the voice she'd been using on me since I was 9. I picked up my coat. I want to tell you, I said something devastating. I didn't. I said, I'm not leaving because I'm angry. I'm leaving because I don't want to spend another year trying to prove something to people who decided before I got here here. Then we drove home and neither of us said anything for 20 minutes. And then my wife said, well, and we both started laughing, the awful kind. And she pulled into a drive-thru and bought us both milkshakes at 9:40 at night like we were teenagers. I didn't call my parents after that. They didn't call me. My sister and I stopped existing to each other. 4 months of that. Then, in October, an email from a man I'd never met asking for 20 minutes. Her company's building is a long, low box off a state route. Glass at the front, plant at the back. I got there 12 minutes early and sat in the lot watching forklifts move through an open bay door, thinking about how many times I'd heard about this place at Christmas without ever seeing it. The receptionist knew my name before I said it. That rattled me more than anything else that morning. He came out himself instead of sending somebody. 60s, tall, glasses pushed up on his head, the rumpled look of a man who'd been in the building since 6. He shook my hand, thanked me for coming, and walked me back through an open floor of desks. I looked for her. I couldn't help it. I didn't see her. His office was at the corner. Nothing fancy. A whiteboard covered in a production schedule, and a shelf of binders that hadn't been opened in years. He shut the door. He sat down. He put a folder on the desk, opened it, took out a single printed page, and turned it around so it faced me. Do you recognize this? I did. Immediately. It was the email she'd sent me that fall. Her work address. My personal one. 11 words in the body. The 41-page agreement listed as an attachment underneath. Can you take a quick look? Would really appreciate your opinion. I read it 3 times anyway. The way you do when a thing you were told didn't exist is sitting in front of you in 12-point type. She sent me that, I said. I know, he said. That's why we're sitting here. He told me the rest of it flatly, without decoration. The way you'd walk somebody through a maintenance report. The distribution deal had collapsed in the summer. Not dramatically. It just ground down and died. 8 months of work and a significant amount of money gone. In the post-mortem, somebody asked why the performance guarantee had been signed off the way it was. And in that meeting, my sister said the terms had been compromised, that an outside party had gotten hold of the draft, that her brother, who had a background in compliance and some long-standing issues with her, had obtained the document and pushed a position that poisoned the negotiation. She used the phrase accessed without authorization, he said. That's a specific phrase. It triggers a specific process. Once she said it, I didn't have a choice. It went to our compliance function and they pulled the archive and found that. He tapped the page once. Sent from her account to you with the attachment 4 days before the clause was finalized. There's a second one where she thanks you for catching it. I hadn't thought about that second email in a year. 3 words and a thank you. I'd forgotten it existed. You didn't take anything, he said. She gave it to you. And then she told us you stole it. For 2 years, I had been a man with something wrong with him. Not accused. Accused would have been survivable. Diagnosed by consensus without examination. And here was a stranger sliding a piece of paper across a desk and dismantling it in 9 seconds. Without effort. Without needing me to perform sincerity. Without asking me to prove I was well. I put my hands flat on my knees so they'd stop. Thank you, I said. You didn't have to tell me any of that. I did, actually. Well, I appreciate it. I was already planning the drive home, which road I'd take, what I'd say to my wife, whether I'd call my mother that night or wait until I could do it without my voice doing anything, and whether I'd say I told you so or be the kind of person who didn't. I put my hands on the arms of the chair to stand up. He said, that's not why I asked you here. Bye. He put the first page back in the folder and took out a second one. I need you to read this without me talking, he said. Take as long as you want. It was an email sent from her work account. The date at the top was from the spring of the year before, 11 months before the contract, 11 months before any of it. The recipient was a name I recognized before I recognized my own on the line below it. It was the recruiter, the woman who had called me out of a directory, the one who ran the confidential search. The subject line was 4 words, a note of concern. I'm going to reproduce the shape of it because the wording has been living in my head ever since. She opened by apologizing for reaching out through a channel that wasn't hers. She'd become aware, indirectly, that a candidate in an active process was a member of her family, and she'd thought hard about whether to say anything. She was writing in confidence and did not want it attributed to her. Then she said, I had ongoing personal difficulties that she wasn't at liberty to detail. Then she said that the last 2 years had been hard on me and that my judgment had been affected. Then she said she loved her brother and hoped I'd be well soon, but that she would not be able to live with herself if she said nothing and something happened later. Then she said that placing me in a role of that seniority would expose the client to real risk. She apologized again for the awkwardness of the position she was putting the recruiter in. She thanked her for her discretion, and she signed it with her full title. At the bottom of the printed page, underneath the signature block, somebody at the recruiting firm had added a line in a different font. A file note. Candidate withdrawn from Slate. Family disclosure. No further contact. Time stamped 4 hours after her email came in. I read it twice. Then I put it down on the desk and looked at the whiteboard behind his head for a while, at a production schedule for a month that had already happened, and I did the arithmetic I had been avoiding for the entire 30 seconds since the date registered. 11 months before the contract, which meant this came first, which meant every single thing I had spent 2 years understanding was in the wrong order. I didn't know that job was here, I said. It came out strangely. I never knew the client. I know, he said. You couldn't have. We ran it blind. That's on us. We chose to run it blind, and that's exactly the gap she used. She never told me she knew. No, she called me 8 months after this and asked me to to look at a contract. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, yes, she did. I sat there and felt the last 2 years reorganize themselves physically, like furniture being dragged into a different room. Because the entire time, every dinner, every phone call, every careful conversation where somebody asked how I was really doing, I had believed I was watching a person lie about something she'd done in a panic, a bad month, a cornered decision that snowballed. I wasn't. I was watching the maintenance of something that had already been built. How did you get this? I said. The firm was audited in the spring. He said it apologetically, like it was a boring answer to an enormous question, which it was. Not because of us. They had a client complaint about candidate handling in a different search, and their board brought in an outside review. Standard sweep. The reviewer pulled every file with a withdrawal note in it that didn't have a candidate signature attached, because that's a pattern you look for, and mine had one. Withdrawn by a third party, on the say-so of somebody who wasn't a party to the process. That's a finding on its own. The firm had to tell the client a search had been influenced by an undisclosed external contact. You're the client. We're the client. It came to us in July and sat with our general counsel for 6 weeks, because nobody could work out who the candidate was. Your name meant nothing to anybody here. So what changed? Compliance already had a file open on her over the distribution deal. 2 matters, 2 systems. He turned his hand over. Somebody finally put them in the same room. Same surname. That's the whole miracle. I laughed. It came out wrong. How did she know I was on the slate? He'd been waiting for that question. I could tell because he stopped moving. The search was blind to candidates, he said. It wasn't blind internally. Directors here get visibility into open searches that touch their function. There was a slate summary circulated to a small group. Anonymized, initials, and background only. Your background is very specific. 14 years in controls, a regional profile, an association listing. He shrugged unhappily. If you know somebody's career, an anonymized profile isn't anonymous. It's a description of them. So she saw a profile and guessed it was me. She saw a profile and knew it was you. I asked whether that was allowed, the circulation. He said it was allowed at the time and that they had since changed it, and that changing it after was not the same as it having been fine. Why are you telling me all this? I said. You've told me things you probably shouldn't have. 2 reasons. He counted them on his fingers, which I found weirdly reassuring. 1, our compliance function has to make a finding about a former employee's conduct. I noticed the word former and did not react to it because I wasn't ready to. And I am not signing anything that describes what happened to you without having heard your side of it first. That's the process. It's also the right thing, and I'd like both of those to be true at once. And 2, he looked at the folder for a second. 2, I've had a version of you in my head for a year and a half, he said. I've been told about you at company events. I've been told to be careful about a man I'd never met. And 2 months ago, I found out that the reason I'd never met you is that the same person who described you to me made sure you never got in the door. He straightened the pages. I'd like to correct my own file. That's all. I don't remember leaving the building. I remember being in the parking lot with the folder copies he'd given me in a plain envelope. And I remember a forklift beeping somewhere behind the glass. And then I remember being on the state route going the wrong direction. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for probably 25 minutes. The thing I kept circling wasn't the lie. It was the 8 months. She sent that email in the spring. She called me about the contract that fall. 8 months in between, during which she picked up the phone and laughed at me for being difficult about it and said our lawyers only like it because everyone upstairs wants it, and told me I did this all day and thanked me. She had already done it. It was already done. And she called me anyway and let me feel useful. And I hung up feeling something warm about my sister for the first time in 10 years. That's the part I had to pull over for. I called my wife from the gas station. I couldn't get it in order. I started in the middle 3 times. Finally, she said, "Are you safe to drive?" And I said yes. And she said, "Then come home and start over." I got home a little after 1, opened my laptop, and did the only thing I actually know how to do. I built a timeline. I've done it professionally maybe 200 times. You put every dated artifact on one line in order, and you stop caring what anybody says the story is. Documents don't have loyalties. They just sit there. My archive goes back 9 years because I've never deleted anything, which my wife calls a character flaw, and which turned out to be the only reason any of this is provable. Here is what came out of it. March the 14th, the recruiter's first message to me. Cold outreach. March the 22nd, my phone screen. April the 11th, the video panel. 90 minutes. My calendar still had it. No company name, just client panel. Confidential. April the 14th, a note from the recruiter saying the client had been very positive and she'd be in touch about next steps, which would include disclosure of the client name. April the 15th, her email. April the 15th, withdrawn. April the 25th, my polite follow-up. May the 2nd, moved in another direction. I sat and looked at April the 14th and April the 15th on 2 consecutive lines for a long time. One day, from the message telling me I was about to learn who they were, to the message from her that made sure I never did. She hadn't found out I was interviewing and reacted. She'd found out I was about to reach the stage where the client's name gets disclosed, and she had less than a day, and she used it. Then I kept scrolling, because there's always one more line. May the 9th, 1 week after my rejection, a text from my mother. I hadn't thought about it in 2 years. It said, in full, "Call me when you get a minute. I'm worried about you, honey." I had called her back. I remember the call. It was vague and strange, and she kept asking if work was going okay, and I said it was, and she said, "All right, sweetheart," and that was that. I'd written it off off as my mother being my mother. That was the first one. That was the beginning of it. 9 days after her email, 5 months before the contract, 6 months before I supposedly interfered with anything. The story about me did not start when I did something. It started the week she needed it to exist. I called the recruiter the next morning. I didn't expect her to take it. She took it on the second ring and said my name in a way that told me she'd been expecting the call for weeks. "I've been told I'm allowed to speak with you," she said. "I want you to know I'd have called you myself if I'd been allowed to, months ago." I asked her to walk me through what happened on her end. She did, and she didn't hedge, and I've thought since that she was the second stranger in 2 days to treat me like a person entitled to information. The email came in at 9:40 in the morning. She read it and she believed it, and that's the part she said twice. She believed it because there was no reason not to. A senior person at a real company, writing under her own name, about her own brother, clearly reluctant, asking for nothing. There's no version of that email that reads as an attack. It reads as somebody doing a hard, decent thing. That's what it's built like, I said. "Yes," she said, "it is." She escalated it to her managing partner. He made the call inside 2 hours, not because they thought I was a risk, but because a family member had raised a welfare concern about a director-level candidate, and if they advanced me and anything went sideways in the first year, the client would ask what they'd known and when. Nobody wants to be the firm that had it in writing. We closed the file the same day, she said. "I want to be honest with you. I didn't fight it. I've thought about that a lot. Did you ever consider calling me?" There was a long pause. The note said not to. It said, "Please don't let him know I contacted you. It would do real damage." Of course it did. Then I asked the question I'd driven home with. Did the client ever hire anybody for that role? No, they restructured it internally. She said it lightly, the way you deliver a fact that isn't yours. It happens. Sometimes the search is what tells a company they already have the person. I said thank you, and I meant it. And then I sat at my kitchen table for a while and thought about the video panel, the blank wall, the finance executive who asked me 20 minutes in how I would handle a performance guarantee that made a manufacturer liable for downstream failures it didn't cause. He'd asked because it had happened to them. They'd been burned, and it had cost them, and it was the reason the job existed at all. 8 months later, the same company signed exactly that clause, over the objection of the only person who had told them not to, and lost 8 months and a great deal of money doing it. They interviewed the answer to their own question and then let somebody talk them out of it, and the person who talked them out of it was the one holding the answer's phone number. He asked me to come back in 9 days. Compliance wanted my archive, every email between the two of us, unedited, with headers. There were 14 in 6 years. 9 of them were happy birthday. I sent all of it, including the ones that made me look bad, because when you hand over a partial file, you've turned yourself into a suspect, and you've done it for free. The second meeting was in a different room, a small one with a table too big for it. He was there and a woman from their compliance function was there, and neither of them wasted any time. She'd built the same timeline I had. Hers was better. Hers had the internal side. She walked through it in order, page by page, and I sat and watched 2 years of my life get laid out as dates, and it was one of the most peaceful hours I've ever spent. There's a specific relief in being in a room where nobody is asking you to be reasonable about it. They weren't kind to me. They were accurate about me. That was so much better. At the end, she said there was one more document she wanted me to see, and she said it in the flat way people say things they've rehearsed because they don't want their voice in it. She turned it around. It was an internal promotion packet, 2 pages, standard form, the kind of thing that gets initialed by 3 people and filed. Effective date, the 5th of May, 20 days after her email. 12 days before the recruiter told me the search had moved in another direction. I read the title line 4 times before it went in. The role she moved into was the one I had been shortlisted for. Nobody said anything for a while. Then the compliance woman said evenly, "We wanted you to see the sequence rather than have it described to you." I didn't say what I expected to. I said, "She'd have gotten it anyway." He shook his head. "Maybe. She was good. But the panel wanted you back, and the decision to go internal got made in the 11 days after you came off that slate. I sat in that meeting. I argued the external option had thinned out. You didn't know why it thinned out." "No," he said. "I didn't." The written finding came 6 weeks later. I got a copy because I'd asked for one, and I suspect because he wanted it in my hands rather than described to me. It said in the flattened language those documents use that no unauthorized access or disclosure had occurred, that the document had been sent voluntarily by an employee, and that the sending was itself the breach, not my reading of it, that the allegation made afterward was unsupported by the record, that a separate finding concerned improper interference by an employee in a confidential external recruitment, undisclosed while she was a candidate for the same position. 4 pages. My name appeared 11 times. Nowhere in it was a single word about what kind of person I am. I read it in a grocery store parking lot and cried for about 90 seconds, which I hadn't done in years, and then went in and bought milk and eggs and a rotisserie chicken. She was placed on administrative leave the same week. I did not ask for that. I asked for nothing except a copy of the record, and when he asked whether I wanted to make a statement about consequences, I said it wasn't mine to have an opinion about. That isn't nobility. I knew that the moment I asked for a punishment, the story becomes a man who wanted his sister punished, and I'd spent 2 years learning how that works. The truth had to be the only thing in the room. It's the one witness nobody gets to cross-examine about its motives. My mother called on a Sunday. I let it ring twice, which for me is enormous. She didn't sound like herself. "We got a letter," she said. "From who?" "From her company. About about you? A pause. Your sister isn't working right now. I didn't answer, because I didn't know which of 9 sentences to use. Did you know about the job? I know now. She said you'd applied there on purpose, to be near her. Her voice did something on the second half of that, and I sat there thinking, that doesn't sound right because you'd have told us. You'd have told us. Would I? She was quiet for a long time. No, she said. I suppose you wouldn't have. That's the closest my mother has come. Not an apology. An accurate observation about the house she built, arrived at out loud, which from her is nearly a confession. My father called 2 days later. He is not a phone person. I read the letter, he said. Twice. Okay, you told us. At the table. You said name one person. Long silence. I told you that was enough. I remember saying it. You did. I said it because it was uncomfortable, he said. Not because I thought about it. That is the most honest sentence my father has ever said to me. And it's the whole thing. Most of the damage in my family was never a decision. It was 30 years of choosing the version that made dinner easier and never noticing you were choosing. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You can't fix the past. You can stop repeating it, he said. All right, just that. This is the part where a story like this usually turns warm. It didn't. My parents and I are more careful with each other now and more polite, and that is not the same as close. Some things get corrected without getting healed. She called 11 days later from a number I didn't have saved. I almost let it go. I answered because I wanted to hear what she'd say, and I won't pretend that was noble. Hi, she said. Hi. The silence went on long enough that I checked the screen. I'm not calling to fight. I'm not fighting. I know. You never do. She stopped. I've been talking to somebody. She keeps asking what I thought was going to happen, and I don't have an answer, and it's making me insane. I stood in my kitchen and said nothing, because the only thing I wanted was for her to keep talking without me shaping it. I saw the candidate summary, she said, and I knew it was you before I finished the second line. You had less than a day. I had less than a day. Her voice went thin, and I thought, if he gets it, he's here. He's in the building. Everybody meets him, and they find out he's the one who's actually... She did not finish that sentence. Not then. Not ever. And afterward, I said, 5 months later, a year later, because if nobody was surprised by it, nobody was going to ask why the search closed. There it was. Not rage. Not a grudge. Not even about me. She needed a version of me to exist, so a question would never get asked, and she maintained it the way you maintain anything. A little at a time, at dinners, at weddings, in a worried voice for 2 years. You could have told me, I said, any day, any of them, and say what? There was an answer to that. You just never wanted to find out what it was. She started crying. I didn't feel what I expected to feel, and I didn't feel the other thing I expected either. Are we ever going to be okay? I thought about it honestly, which took a few seconds and which she deserved. I don't know, I said. She said, okay. And for the first time in our lives, she didn't argue with an answer I gave her. Her boss called me in March, not an email. A call at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, while I was standing in my office holding a cup of coffee I'd already let go cold. He asked how I'd been. I said fine, and for once it was roughly true. Then he said, I'd like to talk to you about a position. I looked out the window at a parking lot I'd been looking at for 9 years. I asked him which one. He said, the one she took.